The problem in Washington is not taxation. The problem in Washington is spending. I think everyone knows that. We can see that by the debt ceiling increase that we just had. We're not even living within our revenue stream right now. We're trying to live within our borrowing limit, and we can't even do that. To answer the question, which tax policy I like the best, I'm very, very much of a constitutionalist. And I think that our founding fathers were by far much, much more wise than any of the people in Washington today. And I totally agree with their tax policy. I think that taxes should be indirect, based on the original Constitution, duties, imposts, and excises. And then if we need additional funding, the additional funding should come from the states. That's the whole purpose of the census. We're supposed to determine representation from the census, as well as the tax burden that's over and above what can be raised through duties, imposts, and taxes. The only way we'll ever remain a free nation is if we get the IRS off our backs and allow the people to once again keep what they have and spend it, as they deem proper. So again, I totally support the founders. I do not support a consumption tax. I do not support, an income tax. But we have to ratchet down spending as quick as possible and then get back to funding our government as the founders proposed.
Is there something in the interim that you would prefer?
Excuse me?
Is there something in the interim before you can actually get rid of the 16th Amendment that you would prefer?
How much time do I have?
20 seconds, go.
No, it's real easy. We can't get rid of it right away, but we have to ratchet down spending. So right now, spending's at 26%. What I'd like to do is decrease spending on non-constitutional programs by 8% per year. That way we'll ratchet it down to nothing in 12 years. I'd like to decrease direct taxes in the same percentage. So whenever we ratchet down non-constitutional spending, ratchet down direct taxes against the individual the same percent.
Thank you, Mr. Kanansky. Gary Glenn.
If we're going to create jobs for Michigan and America, one of the things we have got to do is dramatically reduce or even eliminate a corporate income tax that is more than double the average of the corporate taxes around the world. If it was your money and you had to choose between investing it in a country like ours that taxes you 40% or in Ireland where it's 9%, what would you do? We've got an estimated $1.2 trillion sitting in Swiss and Cayman Island bank accounts that American companies have made in other countries, and they won't bring it back on shore to create American jobs because as soon as they hit the beach, they got to write a 40% check to the federal government. If we're going to be competitive, we've got to change that. Flat tax would be great compared to what we've got now. You could put down what you made, the percentage you owe, and how much you owe in dollar, and send it in on a postcard. You've heard that, right? But that's not my favorite one, because whose name's on the other side of that postcard? The IRS. But my favorite one is fairtax.com, because not only would it allow us to completely shut down the most hated and feared agency of the federal government, the IRS, and save money that we spend on all of those federal personnel. Not only would it be a good idea in terms of tax structure, everybody pays at the point of consumption, but it would be like the Berlin Wall coming down in terms of a burst of freedom for your children and their children. Not to have that dark cloud over your lives all through your life. Did I screw up? Am I going to get audited, be guilty till I'm proven innocent? Let's do away with it, remove it from the lives of our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn.
Well, I agree with everybody up here. The problem is that we spend way too much money. We can argue about taxes all day long, but as long as we have socialist people in the government and running the government and trying to take your money for the socialist programs, we'll never fix taxes in this country. The problem starts with business. Our business taxes are way too high. I'm a businessman, and I know we're at 35%. We need to lower the business tax to 24%. Secondly, as other people said, when GM makes and sells cars overseas, they can't bring that money home. It would be a good idea that when they bring the money home, they could invest it in people, they could invest it in new products, or new machinery, or buy new buildings. But right now, our government taxes that money. So where do they invest it? They build and sell cars in India, they invest it in India. Secondly, whether you have 999 or fair tax, or whatever tax you have, the biggest problem with every one of those taxes is we have slick politicians. And the very first thing they're going to do is make sure you have a second and a third tax. And before you know it, you're going to be paying even more than you are today. We've got to change the system and get rid of the people that are in office.
Thank you, sir. If you can hold on to the microphone. As I said, after each standard question round, we're going to ask a surprise question that the lovely Mary Beth will choose from this envelope. That she'll choose quickly from this envelope. Thank you. All right, out of random questions, what should be done with 12 million illegal aliens? 90 seconds.
30 seconds.
90, you have 90, but you can take 30 if you like.
Quite frankly, I don't know what anybody doesn't understand about illegal aliens. I mean, they're breaking our laws, and they snub their nose at us. First of all, my grandparents were legal immigrants that came to this country in the 20s. Okay? I'm not against legal immigration. And secondly, we have the finest country, we have the best military, we have the best police forces, we have the best technology. Why can't we secure our borders? It's mind-boggling to me to think that our federal government cannot secure the borders. There must be another reason. And as far as I'm concerned, it's either about money or it's about getting elected. And they continue to leave our borders porous. And then they dump something on the illegals that come into this country, and that is the stigma of them being illegal. And that keeps them under the thumb of those politicians.
So with the 12 million, what would you do though?
First of all, I would secure our borders. I think we get off on a tangent here talking about the 12 million. We can't do anything unless we secure the borders, because in a year from now it's going to be 13 million. Okay? Then we can have a debate what we do with them. But as far as I'm concerned, they're illegal. They belong to go home.
Thank you, sir. One more random question. Mr. Heckman, please.
Random question for Randall.
Besides oil, what other energy sources should be explored or produced, and how do we go about doing that?
Well, I appreciate it. Is it 90 seconds?
90 seconds, sir.
Okay. Well, I am in favor certainly of coal, oil, natural gas. We need to unleash the lid that's been put on by the EPA and our federal government, because we have so much energy that God has put in this hemisphere that we need to unleash, and that's going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. But the one that I actually worked on 3 years, in the last 14 years I worked full-time in an area called low-energy nuclear reactions. I'm in favor of nuclear, but particularly LENR. And I don't have time in 90 seconds to fully explain it, but just to say that there are physicists at NASA who say that this is the start of a $1 trillion industry. And I've just, by happenstance and connected to people, I met a guy in France actually at a conference. He actually lives in Chicago. He's figured this thing out. It's going to take private investment, but this is going to change the world. God knows that we need food, clothing, shelter, but modern man needs energy. This energy source is found in the sun, is found in the earth. If we drill a hole 4,000 miles below our feet, it's 4,000 degrees Celsius. And it's being produced by this process that is just awesome. So there's a challenging answer to a very fun question. We need to use the fossil fuels that we have at this point. We need to unleash them, get our economy going, but we need to work on things like LENR. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next round of questions, Mr. Glenn, please, if you can start out. Round 2 will be on debt and spending. Assuming that the 113th Congress begins to get our spending under control, what safeguards must be put in place to help ensure wild spending doesn't happen again?
Well, I reject the premise. How many of you spent 1 minute in the last 3 months thinking the super committee would actually come up with the cuts? And just like politicians many times at the local levels, when you've got a millage on the ballot, they tell you if it doesn't pass, the first thing we're going to cut is fire, police, and schools. And they tell us that the first thing they're going to cut at the federal level is our military and homeland security. Why not shut down the Department of Education? Why not shut down... I'm 53 years old. If you're older than me, you made it through high school without a federal Department of Education. So did I. I would favor a balanced budget amendment, but not one of these long ones that says we'll balance the budget unless we vote not to balance the budget. How about just one that says Congress shall not spend more than it takes in a given year, except in the case of a formal declaration of war or a natural disaster? We haven't declared war on anybody since the day after my dad was shooting Japanese airplanes back in 1941. One thing that made me mad about 3 months ago, that debt ceiling deal, the Democrats came on TV and whined about how much federal spending they were forced to cut. And our good Republicans came on and bragged about how much they forced the Democrats to cut. But if you live in the United States of reality, you know there was no cut in sight. We simply went from a $10 trillion more in debt path to a $7 trillion more in debt path. I like what Senator Rand Paul said. You're going over a cliff at 75, there's no virtue in slowing down to 65. The result's the same when you hit the bottom.
Thank you, sir. We're going to go into the same rotation right here, so Mr. Marino, same question to you, sir.
First of all, we need to restructure Congress, the presidency, and everything to do with how they approach the problem. In the business life, we have something called ISO 9000. And on ISO 9000, every department gets audited. Now in business, it's every year. But in the government, I would say every 2 years. And every department should get audited on waste, fraud, and duplication. Every budget should be zeroed out. And when you zero out the budget, the people that are in charge of those departments should have to come back and show where there's waste, fraud, and duplication. And if they can't, it's an automatic 30% cut out of their budget from right off the top. Next, we need to do something about what goes on with corporations and how corporations have so many regulations, and the regulations wind up hurting the corporations from growing, and it winds up hurting the income. So I think that with making sure we dump a lot of the regulations, we sunset the regulations as well, we look at how it either affects jobs or it affects profits, and we try to get them to a win-win situation.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I think there are 3 or 4 things that we can do to try to cut spending. Clearly, we do need a balanced budget amendment. I agree with Gary that it needs to be simple and enforceable. But I think there are a couple of other things. I think the first question that every member of Congress, and certainly if I were your United States Senator, I would ask, is this government activity constitutional? Is this government activity constitutional? And if it isn't, then I think we need to say, well, maybe this needs to be eliminated and start a conversation that isn't just taking place on the well of the floor of Congress or the Senate, but begins to take place around the country. I think we should also have zero-based budgeting. Every family has to look and say, what can we do this year? What is going to be our revenue? What should we be able to do? What can we do well? The government is trying to do things that it can't do well, that it shouldn't be doing at all, with money that it doesn't have. And I think the only way that changes is that you have to be willing to send a United States Senator from Michigan that's willing to stand like Horatio at the bridge and say, no more. In the United States Senate, each member of that Senate has an enormous amount of influence. And there are now gathering more and more who feel that they too will have the courage to say, no more. We want America back, and the government must shrink. God bless you all.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Scotty Bowman.